How are
Hello,
you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Well, great to see you. I see some people kind of popping on here. So, are you ready to?
I am, yeah.
Great. Well, welcome to the Craft of Crime Fiction. I'm Polly Stewart, and this is an Instagram Live interview series where I talk to writers of all kinds of crime fiction about how they do what they do. And this week, I'm so excited to talk to Allison Buccola. Did I say, is that right, Buccola?
Buccola, but everyone said it totally differently. So it's not, you can say it basically anyway. It's totally fine.
Glad I asked. So Buccola, about her wonderful debut out in February, Catch Her When She Falls from Penguin Random House. And welcome, Allison.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
Great. Love the book so much. And I'm wondering if we can start off, if you can just tell people who might not have had a chance to pick it up yet a little bit about it.
Yeah, so Catch Her When She Falls is a psychological thriller about Micah, a woman whose high school boyfriend was convicted of murdering her best friend. So she has been trying for the past 10 years to move on, to sort of come to terms with what happened. She's come back to her hometown. She runs a coffee shop there. She's in a relationship with another friend from high school. And then a true crime blog starts covering Emily's death. And reminders of the past start showing up at her home and at her coffee shop. And she sort of starts unraveling and is trying to figure out what happened, and whether or not she really knows the truth about what happened that night.
Yeah, that's a great sort of intro for us, and so much in that setup. Good to hear that. So I'm sure you get this question all the time, but you did mention that this novel involves four friends from high school when they get older. Was anything in the novel inspired either by your experience or maybe things that you witnessed?
Yeah, so I did not have any friends who died tragically in high school, so that part's all fictional. But I did some of the particulars about the high school scenes were definitely pulled from high school. I've had a few people ask if I was in marching band from the book because I guess I put a lot of marching band details into it, and I was in color guard, which like kind of counts, but so I did that. The campsite, the place, so there's a campsite in the book that used to be an old Boy Scout camp, that burned down at some point, and there's still little pieces of the camp that sort of remain throughout the woods. And that was actually based on a real place that was right by where I lived when I was in high school. It was just a bizarre spot in the woods, sort of walking through woods, and then all of a sudden there would be these old bleachers, or there would be this like old altar. So that was taken from where I went to high school. And then I guess just in terms of sort of the feeling behind, like some of the feelings about being in high school, I guess were drawn from real life. So, Micah, when she was in high school, like thought that she understood her friendships, her relationships. And I think that, often when you're looking back at your high school relationships from an adult perspective, you're like, I had no idea, and I didn't really know what was going on with these people. And I thought I did, and I just totally missed it. So that, I had that experience, and sort of drew from that writing the book.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So I was in color guard also.
Oh, nice. Oh, awesome.
Yeah, those marching band scenes were very familiar.
Oh,
About
sorry.
the feeling of, kind of thinking you understand what's going on, but not understanding. I think that's so well done in the book. The way the characters sort of, have a different perspective, especially when they become adults. And, the fact that Micah ends up back in her small town, dating a guy she knew in high school, there seems to be this kind of implication. Oh, thanks, Laura. She said that I shouldn't say thank you on your behalf, but
Thanks.
so there's this implication, I think, that they're kind of stuck. Is that kind of how you were thinking of it?
Yeah, I think if not all, most of the characters in the book are really stuck. So Micah, she tried to move out to Chicago, and she's come back, and she's trying to figure out how to move on with her life, and she can't. Ryan, like, she probably would not be in this relationship with this high school friend, but for their shared trauma. Emily never got a chance to grow up. Alex is in prison, and so he's never really had a chance to to live his life. Um, and I won't say much about Joshua since that sort of like comes out over the course of the story, but I think there's, you know, questions about whether he got out, but there's questions about how much he's really been able to move on to.
That's interesting what you say about the relationship between Micah and Ryan, because I kind of I was trying to assess reading how romantic a relationship it was, and I don't think we ever see, maybe once they kiss once, but you feel like she kind of settled for him.
I think they were settling, and I think that they were, I mean, I think they were helping each other. So I think that like they really did get something out of the relationship. And and they were also, I think by the time you see them in the book, it's well into the relationship. Things are sort of starting to come apart. So I don't think that you'd see like the most romantic side of their relationship, but I think for them it was definitely, you know, they understood each other in a way that other people didn't, and that's probably why they came together more so than anything romantic.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that. So that, yeah, like you shared that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One of my favorite things about the book was the setting and the way you sort of detail to draw these scenes. And when you depict Micah mid-20s apartment, like they have a table that isn't big enough for the two of them there. And I was just wondering, you know, did you enjoy writing that part of the book, and what kind of inspired you?
Yeah, I loved it. I am a little past my like mid to late 20s now, so it was definitely like a like trip down memory lane to think about like living in that sort of apartment. So yeah, it was a lot of fun to think about like what the places I had looked like or lived before looked like, where friends had lived. I also drew, so there's a character, Julia, who lives in sort of a, like her house is neglected. She's like not really taking care of it. Things are sort of falling apart. And there are definitely places that I lived that was drawn from too. So yeah, just thinking about, it was fun to look back.
Um, in a piece for Crime Reads that you wrote when the book came out, you described it, Mike, as a nosy neighbor, and you talked about
Mhm.
crime fiction. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I love Nosey Neighbors, or like what I consider Nosey Neighbors in crime fiction. I think, I mean, I guess really broadly, they're people who are not minding their own business. But I think you see this character coming up a lot in crime fiction, who has had, there's something about, it's like it's usually a woman. There's something about her that sort of renders her sort of her credibility sort of suspect. So she's, you know, maybe she's lost someone in the past, or she has some kind of addiction, or she's postpartum, and so she's, you know, exhausted and not necessarily seeing things the way that she normally would, and she sort of starts to withdraw from um, actual relationships in her life and sort of starts to build out these fantasy worlds for herself that are based on things that she sees in her neighborhood. So she's observing and she's watching, and not really engaging, and more just trying to figure out what's going on. And I think it's interesting because I think you see these characters playing different roles in different types of books. So sometimes they're just sort of background characters, and when they're background characters, I think they tend to be, they serve some functional roles, but they also tend to be like obstacles. So they're getting in the way, they're interfering with the investigation, they're harassing your protagonist. And then sometimes they're the protagonist. And when they're the protagonist, they're doing all the same things, but we're rooting for them, and the ends justify the means. And so they, at the end of the story, like it turns out that they were really right to like trample on that crime scene, and they were really right to be bothering the people that they were bothering through the story. So I think in Catcher When She Falls, there's a few different characters who might count as nosy neighbors, and they're sort of playing against each other, and they all think of themselves as the protagonist character. So they all think that they're doing the right thing, and are trying to figure out the truth. So yeah, I love that character. So it was like fun to play with it when I was writing the book.
That's really interesting, and I wonder if is there a way in which they kind of take the role of like an armchair detective? I mean, not in a
Oh yeah, yeah, I think so. And there were, so some of the characters in the book are, I mean, and these are sort of background characters, but you'll see like screen names that come up from the true crime blog, and they're definitely, I think of them as being like bit part nosy neighbors. Yeah.
Yeah, and the true crime blog was one of my favorite parts of the book, and you actually include the text often, and it's a source of information for characters, but it also ends up causing them a lot of pain.
Mm.
What your own feelings are about true crime.
Yeah, so I have consumed a lot of it. When I wrote the book, I was my son was like 8 or 9 months old, and so we were like doing a lot of stroller naps, and I was listening to a lot of podcasts, and a lot of them were true crime podcasts, like My Favorite Murder, and then other like more specific true crime podcasts. And I like them and I enjoy them, and I've listened to a lot of them, but they do feel really, really voyeuristic, and it is often hard when you're like listening to them or watching documentaries to remember that these are like real people who are really affected and whose lives are being affected not just by reminders of this case, but by this consumption. So it's hard. I feel like probably everyone, but I have like very mixed feelings about how good they are. But yeah.
It's so hard to figure out, and I've definitely done the same thing. Babies listening to podcasts.
Oh yeah.
There's you're absolutely right. There's that voyeuristic aspect to it, but also the fact that women are the, huge majority of the audience. There has to be some reasons for that, and it's always kind of fun to unpack, I guess.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And some of it might be, I mean, like you hear the justification a lot, like, oh, it's trying to, you're trying to figure out what you would do in that situation and trying to sort of see what's out there and make yourself, like, you feel unsafe. And so you're trying to make yourself feel safer. And I think that's probably part of it, but it's hard to, I don't know. It's hard to weigh those things against each other.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So the novel is written largely in second person. We don't always, it might slip through time to time, but then it'll get addressed to the character of Joshua. So I'm wondering when in the draft you made that decision, and what the technique did for the novel.
Yeah, so the first draft was not written that way. And I don't outline. So the first draft was sort of like trying to get a sense of what the story was. So it was much more chronological. It was just sort of Micah trying to figure out what had happened to her friend. And I think that, and so I got through it, and that felt like sort of structurally flat. And so I think so at that point I wanted to sort of like fold it back over onto itself and have like sort of the force of the narrative be Micah is driving to find her friend's brother, her deceased friend's brother, and to tell him what she's learned. And so sort of structurally, that's why I decided to do it. But I also think Micah is the sort of person who has like a really hard time just sitting with herself and dealing with her own thoughts. Like, she's never really processed how she feels about Emily's death. And so I think it was really helpful for her to have this like imaginary, almost, because it's like she's trying to think about what she's going to say to Joshua when she finds him. So she has this like imaginary foil to kind of talk back and forth to, so she doesn't really have to sit with herself on this car ride. So that was the other, I guess, reason for switching over to that.
Yeah, so it's almost like provides a reflection for her. It sounds like able to articulate her thoughts better because she's speaking to somebody else.
Right.
So the novel is also divided into these chapters where we're counting down from the beginning of Micah's trip from Pennsylvania and Massachusetts to the end. So we'll get the mileage increments, how much time she has to go. How did you come up with that?
Yeah, so once I decided that I wanted it to be Micah's trip out to Stonesport, that was sort of framing the novel, I just sat down and Googled, like, what route would you take if you were trying to get from, well, Calvary's not a real town, but it's sort of based on Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And then Stonesport is not real, but it's based on Sandwich, Massachusetts. So I was like, if you were trying to go from this place to this place and you didn't want to take any highways, what route would you take? And so then I sort of figured out what all the towns were. And from there, just sort of figured out what the distance was between those towns. And it was in part, part of the reason I did that was just to figure out, like, what is she seeing on this trip and like what should I be looking out for as like landmarks when she's like going through this. So it's sort of helpful for me to figure out like where she was going to be. But after doing that, I was like, oh, I should just like include this many miles left in this town. And yeah, so that's sort of how it found its way into the book.
Oh, that's really interesting. So first for you, you just sort of wanted to have a mental picture of her journey, but
Mm-hmm.
okay, but
Yeah.
some sort of an element of suspense too, where, we're taking
Yeah.
the end of the book, which I will not give away, but great. So your biography says that you have a JD from University of Chicago. Are you currently?
I am not practicing. Yeah, so I practiced. I was working at a law firm up until I guess it's like 6 years ago now. So I was working at a law firm. I found out I was pregnant with my son and wanted to stay at home with him. So once I had him, I stayed at home and then started working on the book.
Okay. But clearly, as an attorney, I'm sure that informs your work as a novelist, and especially working in crime fiction. So how?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I think so. I've always liked writing, and I did a lot of it up until practicing law. I mean, I did a lot of writing while I was practicing law too, but it was not the fiction kind of writing. But the kind of writing that you're doing when you're practicing law, you it's still a ton of writing and it's all on deadline. So you have to like just make sure that you're like putting out content. And I think that if I had tried to start writing this book before having practiced, I probably would have ended up, writing the first chapter and then going back and writing it again and trying to get it exactly right. But because of having that experience working at a law firm, and actually having to like get words onto the page, I was like, okay, well, I just have to like keep on pushing forward, just like you do when you're writing a brief. So I think it was really helpful in like developing the discipline that you need to just sort of like get to a first draft and then keep on going after that first draft.
That makes a lot of sense. I've always heard, legal writing is so incredibly difficult to learn, and like just sort of viewing it as a discipline and as something you had to work hard at. Do you think that helped you as well as a novelist?
I think it did. I think it was yeah, it was definitely a refining process. It was, yeah.
Could you ever see yourself writing a book with courtroom elements, since you know that world?
I was playing around with having a lawyer be the protagonist in the next book that I'm working on. I think the protagonist is actually maybe going to end up having a different career, but I love practicing law, and it would be fun to sort of be able to bring that back into a book in the future.
Yeah, when it's done well, it's such a great element to create conflict. Right?
Oh yeah, well, it's such the adversary like system. It's just right there. You've got it built in.
Good way to put it. So, Brianne, I'm excited to read it.
Thanks.
Some comments here, and while we've got about 10 minutes or so left here, but if anybody would like to drop in a question for Allison, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer them.
Oh yeah.
On the chat. You mentioned that you left your son, and that's when you got to work on the novel. But thinking about the time of publication, I imagine you must have done at least some of this during the pandemic when we were home with kids. And how did you do that?
Yeah, so I got really lucky. We sold the book like early March 2020. So we sold the book. My agent and my editor and I were like emailing back and forth, and we're like, oh, we'll get together in New York. We'll go out like to a lunch and celebrate. And then obviously that didn't happen. Everything closed down. So I had done most of the drafting before the pandemic hit, or most of the early drafting, but all of the revisions that were done after, like all of my editorial revisions were done during the pandemic, and it was tricky. I am extremely lucky. My husband is a professor, so his schedule is really flexible. So we sort of traded off where he would like take the kids for a few hours, and so I could get some writing in, but it was it was definitely a challenge. And yeah, and then working on the next book with with schools being sort of, with school closures happening all the time, things being sort of uncertain, and then also having two kids on instead of just one kid, has been a little bit more tricky to figure it out, but we're making it work.
That's great. Well, I mean, I know obviously there are many worse things going on in the world, but it was not an easy time for writers, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was, it's crazy how how polar of an experience people have, because I think it's been like a really great and productive time for a lot of writers, which is awesome if you can if you have that time and energy to put into it. But yeah, no childcare and a lot of uncertainty has been, it's been a little tricky, but.
So we did get a question here. Let me see if I can look back. So Brianne said, I ask all authors who inspired you to write in the first place, who gave you the courage to do it? It's a great question.
That is a great question. So my family has been super, super supportive, which I really appreciate. I actually have this, when I told my parents that I was like, oh, I want to stay at home and I want to give writing a real shot, I think at first they were really skeptical. But my dad ended up going back and finding all of these things that he had saved from when I was growing up, of different stories that I had written, or I had submitted a story to a newspaper, so he had that and he had cut it out and saved it, a little ribbon that I had gotten that was Allison Lawler is my maiden name. Allison Lawler dreams to be a writer, and he put this stuff together in a collage and framed it and then sent it to me, which was really encouraging and sweet. And I have it, and it's it was my reminder that I have this family around and this support. So that was, I mean, having them support me was amazing. And having my husband so supportive, my family's been supportive. I'm also really lucky to have a lot of friends who were really willing to read my book before it was a thing. So you write this manuscript and then you print it out, and it's 300 something pages, and then you have to try to find people to read it to give you feedback. And so I'm really lucky that I have family and friends who are willing to take that manuscript and give it a shot and look through it and give me their thoughts. So yeah, so it's been great having that support.
Well, I hope you saw all the hearts. That's a great story. Do you have sort of a current writing community of friends that you share work with, other writers, or?
Yeah, so we were in Philadelphia for a while, and when I was in Philadelphia, I belonged to this writing group called Rittenhouse Writers Group, which was awesome. And I'm still in touch with a lot of those writers, but we're now out in the burbs, so it's a little different. But one of the bright sides of the pandemic is that everyone's so comfortable with Zoom now. So I think there's probably way more critique groups and ways to connect with other authors online. So I'm a member of International Thriller Writers does this critique group that's been really amazing. So I'm a member of that, and we do that. We meet once a month to talk about our work. And that's been a great way to find community.
That's great. And Allie here comments asked one of the questions that I was going to ask. What's going on with your new work? Will the next book be in a similar genre? And she also says, did this first book make it easier to get pen
time? Yeah, so the next book is also going to be a psychological thriller. And I think it's made it easier in some ways and harder in others. So it's really nice having written the first book and knowing I've done this before. This is something that I can do now. So it's been nice to have that confidence. I think it is strange writing a second book though, and writing the first book, and when I first started writing it, felt sort of this weird hobby that I had where my son goes to sleep and then I write for a few hours, and it was very much just doing it by myself for a while until I joined my critique group. But now with the second book, I'm writing it and I'm like, oh, people are actually probably gonna read this at some point, which is, it's a whole different kind of pressure that you put on yourself when you're writing the second one. So it's been sort of mixed, but it's been a fun process.
Well, it's good to have a built-in audience, but there's a fear along with that as well. Can you talk a bit about what you're working on in terms of the story, or do you have a title, or?
Yeah, so no title yet. It is a psychological thriller. It's about a woman who uh, grew up in a cult, what might have been a doomsday cult, and she is well, I won't say too much more about it. I've been sort of playing around with different elements of the story. So was going in one direction with it for a little while, and I'm taking it in a new direction now. So some of it is still possibly going to change, but yeah, psychological thriller and cult is the next one.
I'm sold, just based on great. Oh, and Emma says, can't wait to read your second book.
Thanks.
Well, speaking of good reading, I'm wondering what else you've been picking up lately, either books that are already out or things that are forthcoming that you think are really great.
Yeah, I got this one when it came out, and then just finally got around to reading Notes on an Execution by Daniel Kukowski. Have you read that one?
Yes, I talked to her a couple weeks ago. It's
Oh,
amazing.
awesome. Oh, I'll need to find that because that book is amazing. I have been thinking about it since I since I read it. And it's a book that I belong to like three book clubs. I belong to too many book clubs. So most of the books that I read, I get to like talk about with someone. And that was when I just read by myself and I was like, oh, I wish I had someone to talk about this book with. Um, but for anyone who hasn't read it, it's about a serial killer, or it's not, so it focuses on this serial killer who it's the day of his execution, and it's sort of like walking through his day of the execution, but then it jumps to the woman in his life, and so his mother, um, the sister of his wife, and sort of tells the story through their eyes. Really, really incredible book. And then another one that I just read that was really fun is Make Me Disappear by Jessica Payne. That's coming out about a week from now, I think. I think it's like May 16th is the release date, May 15th or 16th. But that one is about a woman who was in this really possessive and controlling relationship. And it gets pretty bad, and she decides that the only way out is to fake her own kidnapping, and then things don't go as planned. So it was really fun and really twisty, and that comes out soon. Um, and then I haven't read this one yet, but I pre-ordered My Summer Darlings by May Cobb, and I like cannot wait to read that one. I'm very excited about that.
I love it. And yes, I have that one for you.
Me too. Yeah.
I think out.
Yeah.
And Brienne said psychological thriller is my favorite genre. So
Yeah, I love them too. Oh, and the first book is Notes on an Execution.
well, great. Do we have any last questions for Allison? Well, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Again, I when she falls out in February, but if you haven't read it yet, please go find a copy, and we'll be eagerly waiting for what you do next, Allison.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for having me here.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.